Hi, my name is Carey Foster, and I was in Star Trek, the original pilot, playing an Orion, and I was also a Starfleet officer in about 7 of the original episodes. And this is Trek Untold.
Hello and welcome back to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I am your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. Whenever I have the opportunity to talk to someone from the original Star Trek series on this podcast, I will take it. I will never turn down an interview like that. And today's guest is one of those lovely people who had a chance to work on Star Trek when it was still just really nothing. And that's because today we're talking to Carey Foster. And Carey was part of the Star Trek universe from day one. She was there in the original pilot with Jeffrey Hunter, The Cage, where she played an Orion girl who, well, apparently got cut from the final episode that we saw aired, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. But you might recognize her from about 6 or 7 episodes of the original series that she appeared on as a Starfleet bridge officer. And you would have seen her dressed up in her blue miniskirt, sitting in various places across really all different parts of the Enterprise. And, while she didn't necessarily have a lot of lines per se, she was there and got to see things from early on when Gene Roddenberry was really kind of still figuring out what Star Trek was, and when America was also still just discovering it for the very first time. But Carey was no stranger to performing, as I learned during this interview, and she spent a lifetime perfecting her other craft, which was dancing. And dancing is where she really got her start in Hollywood as well. That led her down to working with Elvis and working on some other big movie musicals, as well as a lot of stage performances here. So Carey is a truly diverse performer in that respect, but once she left Hollywood, that's where her life really started to change, and in turn, she started to change other people's lives. Because Carey went into the world of teaching. She went on to become a Montessori teacher, she continued to train people in dancing, and quite honestly, she's done a lot of really amazing and wonderful things to not just help herself, but to help others out there. And that's really, I think, the spirit of Star Trek and why she's a perfect ambassador to not only talk about Star Trek the original series, but just to talk about what it's like to just be a really good, positive human being in this very troubled world. So aside from Trek talk, we're going to get some old Hollywood talk, which I also always enjoy, and I think a lot of you folks out there do as well. So let's go ahead and get excited because we've got Carey Foster today talking TOS, original series, and a whole lot more. But before we get into our interview with this week's guest, I want to ask you guys if you are following Trek Untold on social media. You can follow Trek Untold on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, all at Trek Untold. And stay tuned, we're probably going to pop up on Blue Sky very, very, very soon. If you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, please make sure you are subscribed to it wherever you are listening to it. And if you can, leave a 5-star review and rating when possible. If you're one of the fine folks out there who is watching this on YouTube, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date on all the latest episodes that are coming out. If you're in a position to financially support this show, please consider doing that on Patreon. And you can help us out here by visiting patreon.com/trekuntold. Doing so will allow you to get all sorts of perks and bonuses, including early access to episodes, a chance to ask guest questions of your own, and a few other things here and there as we continue to build this Trek Untold community. So with all of that out of the way, it's time to beam in this week's guest. Computer, access interview file. And joining me now across the screen, we have someone who you have probably noticed in the background of many Star Trek The Original Series episodes, and today we're going to help tell her story. Carey Foster, welcome to Trek Untold.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Matthew. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, if there's one thing that my audience always wants, it's more people from the original series. And it is depressing to think about, of course, how long ago that show was and how many of those performers aren't with us. So any chance I have to have the opportunity of speaking with someone who worked on the show like yourself, I have to take it, absolutely. And I'm excited to chat with you today because you have a very diverse background and a whole lot of different talents. So this is going to be a fun one today.
Thank you.
So normally I start the show by asking what your earliest memory of Star Trek was, but you were there season 1, so we're going to skip ahead. We're going to move past that question because there was no Star Trek until you were actually in the show. So let's just kick things off by getting a little bit of background information about yourself, Carey. So can you tell us 3 things here: where you were born, who your parents were and what they did, and what little Carey wanted to be when she grew up?
So I was born in Detroit, Michigan, and most of my family was centered around Detroit, cousins, aunts, uncles. And my father, my parents married during World War II, and um, my father was stationed in Riverside for a time. I was born in Detroit, but after I was born, we moved back to Riverside, and we were there for a time. At which point, after the war, then we moved back to Michigan to be around family. And I think because of my mother, she grew up in Hollywood. She was an influence in us moving back to California. And I think part of it too was my health. I kept getting sick. So at about 4.5, 5, we moved back to Riverside. So I grew up in Riverside until I was about 12. My interest in dance started really young. And I my mother found a teacher for me in Riverside for a time. And then I outgrew her, and she's the teacher that recommended them, my parents, taking me to Eugene Loring, who is who was a very famous choreographer. And he had a dance studio, and he was training dancers because his concept of dance was that a dancer today had to know everything. They had to know every form of dance and just be ready for anything, whether it be modern, jazz, or ballet. So I auditioned to get into a school at 12, at which point, and he was in Hollywood at this old Roosevelt Hotel.
Huh.
And down below, there were old, retired actors living in the hotel. And the bottom floor had been a ballroom, and it was converted into 2 dance studios and a large lobby. And it was all marble. It was beautiful. And anyway, so I auditioned for Eugene Loring, and I got a scholarship. And we were still living in Riverside, so we were driving from Riverside to Hollywood. And my parents decided that was a lot because my dad would drive me in the evenings. And so we moved to Hollywood I was about 15, 14, 15, so that I could then I took 18 classes a week.
Only 18.
Only 18.
Right.
And rehearsals. So that was my life through high school.
Wow.
And the dance studio was just up the block from Hollywood High. So, and I went to Hollywood High School through my 9th to 12th.
That is some serious commitment to your craft. And it's
Yeah.
itching.
So my father was in floor covering. You asked what he did. He was in floor covering. And my mother was a homemaker. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of curious to know that because I was actually going to ask you like what kind of dance you specialized in, but you're basically telling me like that you would have been the equivalent of like a polyglot when it came to dancing. Like you just have to have a little bit of everything.
Yeah. The only thing, well, it was very, very specific. We had to have ballet as the base.
That was the foundation.
So every day there were 2 to 3 ballet classes, or 1 to 2 classes that were strictly ballet. Then we had to have a choreography class. We had to have modern. And then Mr. Loring would bring in special teachers like a Hindu teacher. And we would learn Hindu or Spanish or, the classical studies mainly. And unfortunately, which I wish he had had, he didn't consider tap as important. So I never got tap.
That's the one that I learned growing up because I learned dance when I was like, I think about 6.
Did you?
I did, yeah. I started out as a dancer myself, and then I moved on to other things. And basically, dance was my fundamentals because then from there I went to martial arts things. But I attribute a lot of the balance and discipline to dance early on.
Yes, yes. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I envy you. You had tap. I wish I had. I have a little, but not anything to write home about.
It's one of those things where, I'm probably too old to start it again now, but it's one of those things where I kind of wish I had done a little bit more of it because it was a lot of fun. It's just, I love watching
It's a
tap.
lot of fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like I'm a
tap
big
is a lot
flamenco
of
dance
fun.
fan also. Like that's my, I think, my favorite kind of dance. I don't know how to do it, but I like watching it.
Flamenco is so fun.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
from there,
Yeah.
we're talking Hollywood High. This is high school, Carrie. But once you're done with high school, what happens next? Did you go to a conservatory to continue your training?
I was with Eugene Loring in his company
Okay.
called the Dance Players, and we traveled around California, and then we went to Dubuque, Iowa, and did some performances there. But he was into educating about dance, and that dance itself was a language. In fact, I think he might have called the performance that dance as a language, and that you don't need a lot of extra things to make a performance. So you don't need fancy costumes and all of this. He would have us wrapping in cloth, and we learned sign language to show dance and movement with the signing. And so it was a very sweet performance, and we would do it at colleges and universities around the country. He finally settled. His school closed, and he became a professor at UC Irvine and started the dance program there. That was his. I He was pretty remarkable. He was a young choreographer when he began. He was only like 17, and he
Wow.
did Billy the Kid. He choreographed that ballet, and that was very ahead of itself in how he put movement together.
Hmm.
And it was the time of Agnes de Mille and those types of choreographers that were exploring beyond ballet and beyond, Russian, the Russian
A little bit
technique.
more of what we consider today like the modern contemporary style of dance.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So he did Billy the Kid, and they ride horses. I mean, yet it's balletic, right? And then he did Capital of the World. He did movies. He did Funny Face and Silk Stockings with Sid Reese and then with Audrey Hepburn.
Hmm.
And he did a wonderful children's movie called 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T. And he liked to experiment with the camera. If you've watched Funny Face, he he faced the camera into the lights, and that wasn't done at that time. So he was innovative. He was ahead of his time in a lot of
I
ways.
mean, if you're telling me that he worked on
So
5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, for folks who don't know what that is a Dr. Seuss movie, a very rare, obscure Dr. Seuss
very
movie.
well. Yeah,
And it
yeah.
is like, that is an experience in and of itself. That's a whole other podcast me and Carrie could talk about. I feel like it's just that movie. But if you're talking that this person worked on that, that just should show you the level of experimentation this person did.
Yes, exactly. He was all about experimenting with movement so that it becomes more than just a balletic. It tells a story, and it's not just strictly a certain line and a certain look.
Hmm. Well, speaking of
Yeah.
stories, I mean, what it sounds like is a lot of your education was basically on the road, touring, performing. And I imagine that you're touring
And
with a lot of people
as
in this company.
after I left high school.
Yeah, okay.
Before that, he didn't believe that we should perform.
Really?
He went, that's training time.
Hmm.
So he was against our performing. I did high school plays and things, but I didn't go to auditions. I didn't do that at that time. Today, kids do, they want that experience, and there's a value to it too. But it was strictly training. That's what it was. And so that's basically my background that I'm coming from.
So let's say that maybe, beyond the tour bus, right? Beyond touring with your mentor, what was your first, so let's just go now beyond this initial tour that you did. Like, what was you say
Okay.
would be your first professional dancing gig that you did somewhere that wasn't with that group? Was there something beyond that?
Yeah. My very first was I got out of high school and I did go to an audition, and it was for the Hollywood Bowl. And I can't remember. I think it was Goki Grant. Do you know who she is?
No, don't think I know the
She
name.
she He sang the song They Call the Wind Mariah.
Oh, okay. This is some TCM stuff right here. Yeah, I should know this.
So this is a long time ago. And the Philharmonic Symphony was there. So that was my first professional job. It was like a week, right? And I got to perform at the Hollywood Bowl. And after that, I tried to remember a sequence. So long ago, sometimes I get sequences confused. But that was my first job. And I think I decided that I wanted to do auditions and I wanted to start performing. They were doing musicals at the time, right? Hollywood musicals like The Music Man.
Mm-hmm.
And
so just to kind of put
I
a date,
remember auditioning.
Just to kind of put a date around this time, this would be like, then that would be, was it 1955 or 1960? What are we talking about?
It was about 19. It had to be 19. Well, I graduated from high school in 61.
Okay, so then be around there then.
It was after that. Yeah. And some friends of mine had auditioned for Music Man and got in. So I was excited for them. I just wished I had an audition, right? Before that, I did go to an audition for West Side Story, and some of the dancers from our studio were accepted. I was too young at the time. I think I was still in high school at that time. It was right around 1960. I was about to graduate, but I hadn't. And so they couldn't hire us because we were underage, right? But I got all the way to the finals, and I was, they had us come on the set for a day, and they hired a teacher and all of that. So we went through, I had that experience, right?
Which is pretty amazing, yeah.
That was fun.
One of the things I was looking at when I was checking out your IMDb page in particular was a lot of the work you did was with Elvis Presley films. And I am very interested in hearing more about working with Elvis. This would actually not be the first time we've discussed him on this podcast. In fact, we had an episode with Sandy Gimpel, who also did Star Trek and did the pilot and some other early Star Trek stunt work. And she basically got her start working on Elvis films too. So it's kind of funny. There's this connection. You probably worked with each other and didn't even know it at the time. But
probably,
yeah. But I'd love to hear about just how you got set up with Elvis and what it was like working on those films.
Well, at the time, I want to say that my uncle, who was Gene Roddenberry, I mean, he's not my blood uncle, but that's what I called him, was working at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer at MGM. And I got into a program there working with the drama director and doing scenes with up-and-coming actors or actresses, Linda Evans and those people. And there was an audition on the lot for dancers. And I don't know how I think I got a call about it. And it was with Hal Belfer was the choreographer. And so I went to the audition and got it. So that's how it started. It was for Kissin' Cousins. That was the first one.
And how many did you do, if you remember?
I had to have done 3 or 4 of his movies. Roustabout, Kissin' Cousins, and some others where I would just come for a bit part or something.
Okay.
Yeah, and he was very kind, very nice person, and he did notice me, and we did go out together. Well, date. He didn't go anywhere. He just stayed at home, but we did date for a bit.
Okay, well, I don't know how much dirt you want to talk about Elvis in that area. That might just be for you and him to know. But that's kind of funny, actually, because I'd heard that with Sandy. Actually, she said, a lot of the dancers would go out with him and date him every now and then. She didn't really do that. She wanted to keep it kind of like a boundary between you. But it's kind of interesting that, like, I'm assuming he approached you, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I would never have approached him, no. Yeah, he approached me, and he wanted me to do more movies. That was his idea. But I
Mm,
didn't feel comfortable with, being hired because I knew him or was dating him. I didn't. So
mm.
I didn't do that. I just chose to, if I auditioned, I got it, great.
That's an important thing because we have to again now put like a perspective of when we're talking about this, and this is now early '60s, and there is a kind of power dynamic, really in all
There
professions of women.
was.
Yeah,
There
with
was.
with men being in this position of power, and you doing something like that is actually pretty bold for its time to say like, hey, no, I want to put this separation between us in that regard. We got to keep professional and personal apart.
Yeah, I went in the direction of the choreographers. David Winters uh, choreographed many of his movies, and I was called by David to do the movie.
Mm.
So
Those must have been amazing
Tony
sets to work on
Basil,
too.
Teri Garr, those people.
And
Yeah, so we were all dancers on those movies.
and those must have been just like impressive sets to work on also because you went basically from like dancing in theaters now suddenly you're in a Hollywood movie set. And that's with Elvis. That's got to be pretty huge to feel, right?
Yeah, yeah. I, for whatever reason, I wasn't um, starstruck by him, and I don't know why. I don't know why that is. I appreciated him, and I thought he was very talented, but I wasn't madly, going to follow him anywhere he went. Or yeah,
I think he had that kind of
that
presence
was.
around him where it's like you can tell he's got the star power, but he's also very human.
He's very human and very he. When we were seeing each other, he was very kind, but he was also, he would admit things.
Hmm.
So he shared things that were private to him, which made him even more human, right? So I I felt a bit sorry for him and his life because it was very, you could say, insulated,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
He didn't have a choice. He didn't have choices like you or I might have,
Hmm.
you know. So that was my experience with Elvis. But I thought he was a wonderful person.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that is the Elvis side of the story here, but we kind of snuck in some Star Trek stuff here because I was going to ask you about this specific connection, and now we've gotten into it a little bit here. So, yeah, Gene Roddenberry was, in a way, kind of had some family ties to your family. So, I'd love to kind of hear a little bit more about that and I guess how that could lead into your career a little bit on TV.
My mother went to school with Eileen Roddenberry. Um, I don't remember what her maiden name was, but Eileen and my mom were close friends in high school. And so the story to me, when I find out facts now, what my mom told me doesn't quite fit the facts of time, right? Because she remembers
And
Gene
now
coming
we've
to
gotten into it a little bit
school,
here. So,
and
yeah, Gene Roddenberry
uh,
was, in a way,
maybe
kind of
he
had
was
some
older. I
family
don't
ties
know that he
to
went to
your
Hollywood
family.
High.
So, I'd love to
It
kind of hear a
gets
little bit more about
crazy.
that
But
and I
they
guess how
did
that could
know
lead
each
into
other.
your
I
career a
know
little bit
that.
on TV.
And so my mom and Eileen were close friends in high school. She knew about her Eileen dating Gene. She evidently met him at some point, and she had her impressions of him. And then during World War II, I mentioned that we were stationed in California after I was born.
And now we've gotten into it a
We
little bit here.
we
So yeah, Gene Roddenberry
moved to
was
California. It
in a
was
way
World
kind of had
War
some
III. It was
family ties
1943
to your family. So I'd love to kind of
ish.
hear a little bit more about that
Later,
and I guess how
no,
that could
actually,
lead
it would
into
be
your career a little bit
1944
on
because I
TV.
wasn't born till the end of 43. So it was 1944, and we were in housing for military couples, families. And my mom was out on the back porch sweeping and doing her laundry or something. And a woman came out next door and was doing her laundry and stuff. And it was Eileen. So, so they reignited their friendship, and
And
Gene was
now
there,
we've
of
gotten into it a little
course.
bit here.
So they would get together, and I was the first baby between the two couples. So I was the baby. So I think that created a relationship for me with Gene because I was always the first baby among the two couples.
Hmm.
they were close. My parents were close with the Roddenberrys and stayed that way. They would go on cruises and they would go to Catalina. They would do things together as couples when I was growing up. And we would visit them and they would visit us. They would visit us in Riverside. We would go to Temple City. And I would see that he was a police officer at the time
Mhm.
after World War II. And I hope I'm not jumping. Anyway,
It all sounds right to me
after
as far
World
as his
War
timeline too. Yeah, this sounds accurate.
II,
And if you start talking
yeah.
Gene Roddenberry, it gets timey wimey, very spaced out there, right?
Yeah, it does. It gets anyway. So, uh after Riverside, we moved back and then we moved back to Riverside. My mom wanted for the weather and a lot of reasons. And the Roddenberrys were always close to us. When we were on the East Coast in Michigan, we would visit them. I want to say, now this is my 4-year-old brain. My memory was we would visit them at someplace like Chicago.
Okay.
I think he was flying at that time. And he still didn't have any children. So, yeah. And then we moved to Riverside, and then they moved out west, and he was a police officer and a writer. So we would visit his home, and I would get to see his gun and go shopping with Eileen. She loved to shop, so did my mom. So
That's kind of fun.
so that's the familial connection. So
Yeah.
my dad, when they decided what I was to call them, was it was my Aunt Eileen and Uncle Rod, and so it was my dad who decided on the word Rod. That instead of Uncle Gene, it was Uncle Rod.
Uncle Rod. All
Yeah,
right. And I
yeah.
think like one of your earliest TV gigs and would have been with Uncle Rod on The Lieutenant, which was I think he did 3 episodes of that, right?
Yes. Yes. So that was the first one. I had been dancing on shows. I did the Dean Martin. I did specials. Uh, well, the timeline is vague. I don't know. I want to say it was before the lieutenants,
Okay.
but maybe not. I would have to really look at
Well, listen,
it.
you were a busy working performer, so it's understandable. This happens a lot in the show too.
I was busy. I
Yeah.
was working. Yeah, and I had moved out at about 20 years old. I moved out of the house, and I got an apartment with Teri Garr and myself, and for a while Tony was there, Tony Basil, and um, Terry and I were, teen queens. We were teenagers, and we called ourselves teen queens. So it was a fun time, fancy free.
I just got to know what Teri Garr is like at that age. This is, she's at that point still just working as well. Same thing, trying to find her way in Hollywood. And
Yeah, yeah, she was a dancer. She was working her way up, and going to all the auditions that we all went to, and yeah,
I'm kind of
we
curious to
did.
not to jump ahead too
Go.
much, but I'm kind of curious because Teri Garr eventually did do an episode of Star Trek also, and
She did.
yeah, and I don't know if did you ever talk to her about that or her feelings about the episode? Because I've heard some things, I've heard a few things
We
about it.
we kind of separated after I was married.
Okay.
We 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 stayed in touch for a little while. Um, but she was always fun to be around, and I enjoyed her company. But after I was married, it kind of we separated, went our own ways.
Okay.
Yeah, and she was still seeking, to become an actor. She still had several years of work towards that.
Yeah.
And that's right at the point when I decided not to pursue this.
All right. Well, as far as the Lieutenant goes, that had a few folks who were also Star Trek adjacent, such as Gary Lockwood, Ricardo Montalban. What can you tell us about your time on the set of the Lieutenant? Because again, this is now you've done a little bit in movie stuff, you've done a little bit of like live TV stuff, but now this is like let's just say
Oh,
different kind of ballpark.
I remember the first job. I had to walk through a door and say a few lines. I was acting in it, and I had to say a few lines. And I remember thinking, how in the world do I open that door? It was a push door. It's like suddenly all of my, conscious awareness was like, wait a minute, I'm going to be filmed opening the door. How do I open the door? And so I went through that sense of, not quite knowing what I was doing because I was being filmed. So, yeah, that's what I remember. And I had a nice part. The first one was um, small, just a girl kind of picked up because she was drunk. And the next one I had more lines in. Um, I remember it was with Chad Everett. I don't remember who else.
Okay.
We had a few lines. Yeah.
Like,
And I remember Gary Lockwood. We dated for a while too. Um, yeah. The set was pleasant. Everybody was always nice, you know. And Gene would come to the set occasionally, check on things. Yeah.
uh,
So his office was close by the set, I remember. Yeah.
Now, I'm kind of curious to know about, to kind of follow up on that as well. We talked a lot about your dance training, but had you actually had like any schooling or education in acting?
Yeah, I
Okay.
took acting classes too.
Okay.
Um, with Jeff Corey, and other people in Hollywood. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And through high school, I was in the drama classes, and I loved acting. That was, I was probably just as passionate about acting as I was dancing.
Okay. So, so on that note, then I think that kind of brings us into the world of Trek here, because now we're away from dancing for a bit. We're now full on acting here. And you appeared very early on, extremely early on in the Star Trek universe. So we're talking, I believe, pilot as well as first season stuff here.
The
Um,
original pilot.
Original
Yes.
pilot, yeah. So, how did this come about here? Was this like an Uncle Rod shoved in the right direction, or was this like an audition you just happened to come upon, didn't know he was involved in it?
I was called for it. Now, I don't know the detail. I mean, there are things I didn't know. He wrote
Hmm,
letters. Gene wrote letters to producers about me. I didn't know this at the time.
interesting.
Yeah, and I was working when Star Trek happened. I was working in the Valley at a theater in the Round. Art Linkletter bought this theater, and we were doing West Side Story, and I think Anna Maria Alberghetti was in it. She was the star, and Brian Avery. Anyway, so I was rehearsing with that for with David Winters, and we were learning the original choreography, and so it was a lot of work. It was very intense. But I'd gone through all rehearsals, and then I got this call, and the show was happening, and so call was at 6 o'clock or 6:30, and then I got this call for Star Trek, the series. Well, I didn't know. It was just a pilot.
Pilot at that point, yeah.
Yeah, it was just a pilot, and it wasn't a series for a while afterwards. Um, so with that, I decided I would try to do it. It was for a dancing part,
Hmm.
and as I recalled, nothing was actually choreographed.
Hmm.
We just improvised, which, with my training, I could do because I could do any kind of dancing.
And this would have been for the role of like one of the Orion dancers, right?
The Orion dancers. And as I recall, I had an agent at the time. And so as I recall, my agent called me, and how he was notified, I don't know. I don't know the details of that. Um, so there was no audition. I just went to the set, and Jeffrey Hunter um, was the actor. Um, and then there were uh, the dancers, and of course, all the other actors were there too. And I remember Gene came in and he wanted pictures taken, and he did that one picture that was kind of a joke. Um, he liked jokes. He liked to tease people, and be silly. There's a picture of me looking over the script with him. I don't remember taking that picture, but it happened.
It happened.
That's me. Huh. So, yeah, and it was very exciting, but I was late for my theater call. I got in trouble a little bit.
Well, I'd imagine so,
But
because if correct me if I'm wrong, but you were a little green for that moment too, weren't you?
um no, they kept me. I mean, according to the pictures, I was the same color.
Okay, so
I
you were
mean,
spared from getting the full on green effect.
I wasn't.
Hmm.
No. I was one of the white Orions, I
Yeah,
guess.
the albino Orions maybe.
Right. I think I had a wig.
Hmm.
I think they had a wig on me because the hair is very dark. So that was not my hair. Uh, in fact, there were three of us that were not, that were white.
Hmm.
Yeah, that I recall.
So I'm
Yeah.
curious to know, like, because there's a lot of drama surrounding the original Star Trek pilot and the fact that it took several, essentially, pilots until it got picked up for a full season run. Had you ever talked to Gene at that point? And, like, was he ever telling you things like about, oh, this is stressing me out, this is happening here? Like, did you ever hear any of the behind the scenes stuff, what was going on with Star Trek?
He never shared that he was stressed about anything with me. He was rather watching me carefully and making sure that I wasn't susceptible to Hollywood stuff at
Mm.
that time. So if I was going to go on an audition, he would call and talk to me about it and say, and he would sometimes even call that person and say,
Uncle Rod is checking up
you
on
be
you.
careful. Yeah. So people were a bit cautious around me, which, I thank him for. That was good.
I mean, that honestly is. You probably
Uh,
got safeguarded from a lot of bad things that could have happened
I did.
at that time period.
I did. And really, the times, my personality just didn't fit that time. And I think that's why I willingly separated from it
Mm.
and went a different way, because I I couldn't deal with that um, continual pressure, right?
Mm.
To be a certain kind of person. No. So yeah. So that's why I basically became a mommy
Yeah.
and a teacher.
We're gonna come back to
Yeah.
all that actually, because I do want to ask a few questions about that and a little bit more about why you left Hollywood ultimately. But I got a few more Star Trek questions for you, Carey, because from there, from Orion girl, you then get, I guess, a promotion to now join Starfleet.
I know. So so that was a job, and I went on with my doing television and motion pictures, um and then I got a call, and again it was through an agent. So and for the life of me I can't remember his name right now. Sad, huh? Anyway, that's
That's
a
the
long
business,
time
kid.
ago.
Them's the breaks.
Yeah, I guess. Anyway, so I got a call to, and I think I don't know that I had a couple lines or something, and they were cut. I don't know, but to go to the set. Now I was living right across the street from Desilu Gower,
Yeah,
so an early call was fine with me. You
that's the
know,
easiest commute
it was
ever.
just basically walking across the street. Um, well, I had to walk around anyway.
Better than
Um,
an hour in LA traffic.
yeah, no, it wasn't that. So yeah, Teri and I had an apartment right across the street. It was nice. It was fun. It
Hmm.
was fun. Um, and so I was called for the first, I guess, for the first show.
Hmm.
And I remember Gene coming down while I was getting my makeup on and wanted my hair to be a certain way. I think it was all moved over to one side, and I don't know. He had very specific ideas of what he wanted. And then, costume. I went to costuming, and then I was on the set and walking in the, on the deck, walking and sitting and smiling or not, right?
Well, we should add to this
Having
is
coffee. I think I had coffee or something.
now
It didn't taste good.
at this point. Are you in full uniform?
Yes,
You are. Okay, so we're talking the mini skirt, we're talking the knee high boots, the whole 9 yards.
the whole 9 yards.
So I've always been
Yeah.
wondering, how curious. I've always wanted to know, how that costume actually feels. Like, was it itchy? Was it terrible? Because the Starfleet costumes have always been,
No,
up
it
and down
was it
sometimes.
was like a soft material, and it was no different than I dressed in a dance studio. I mean, to me, it wasn't anything that I wasn't familiar with. It wasn't. I know people talk about how risque it was or something, but I was fully clothed, and to me, it was like dancing
Hmm.
in a show or something.
Because I think that was one of
The
the points that
costume.
like Gene really was strong about, was that he wanted the miniskirts because he also wanted it to show like, yes, there was sexuality, but also these women were in control of that sexuality to a degree. I guess this was like his version of essentially like the 1960s feminism as much as he could have good way
He did,
to get away with.
and that was very apparent on the first pilot because he did talk to me about how he was getting pressured to not have our belly buttons show
Hmm.
and that we had to cover our belly buttons. And he thought it ridiculous, that he was censored that way, or that women would be censored or people would be censored. So I remember him. So he was always kind of pushing the envelope about that.
Yeah. I've also wanted to know too, because we see your character pop up in several episodes. I don't know if the script ever gave her a name, or maybe you gave her a
I
name. Like, was there a name
remember
for her?
reading the name Mary Rose
Mary Rose.
or
Okay.
something. Yeah, or Emma Rose, something like that. Yeah, but gee, I wish I had the scripts today. Huh? Well, oh well.
Yeah.
Didn't know.
And again, you're
Have
doing a bunch
no.
of early episodes here, so I would just love to hear if you can recall, or maybe just get like a general feeling of going on those sets. Because you said you were walking through those sets, you were on the bridge, you were in the different corridors and different rooms, but these are Star Trek sets. This is kind of amazing for 1960s television. What was your feeling, if you can remember, of just walking through those sets and just touching those control panels and seeing this bizarre world in front of you?
I remember watching the filming, some, and and to me it was pretty elaborate at the time and very impressive, right? That so much detail and thought went into all of this work that was now being, part of this show. I remember watching the actors, and I think it helped them
Hmm.
to be more focused, because the panels and everything, the lights and everything were very elaborately done
Hmm.
and very thoughtful. And so for me, it was a privilege to be a part of this. Though I didn't know at the time and probably wasn't as appreciative at the time as I am now, right? Um, but I think, watching William Shatner and all the people working around it, they had something to hold on to as actors,
Hmm.
something real.
You're very immersed in that world, and it's all physical. It's not like today
Yeah.
was a lot of CG. This was real hand-built sets. All the blinking lights are in your
Yes.
face actually going off.
Yes. Yes, it was. So, though I didn't have the opportunity to sit at one of those panels, I was in the break room or something, or
Yeah.
lining up for something, or walking across the set, or whatever. It still was the feeling
Hmm.
that this had a real essence to it, right? It was something real.
Well, that kind of leads
So you
me.
can imagine yourself
Yeah,
there,
definitely.
right?
That kind of brings me back to something that we talked about off air before we started recording, and that was the terminology for what kind of a performer you would have been considered at the time, because you were essentially a background actor, as opposed to being referred to as an extra. And I didn't really know there actually is like some history behind those two terms and the importance of the terms. So I'd love if you can kind of just like talk to us about what that really meant and what was going on in Hollywood with that specific type of actor.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that takes me into the dance world because in the dance world, dancers were considered extras. So, it didn't fit right with any of the dancers that you would have you would have spent your life studying something and then you would be considered extra,
Hmm.
kind of didn't fit. It was more like background, okay, to us. And we were acting as much as anybody. So that was what I understand where dancers got together and started arguing with the guilds about why dancers should be accepted into Screen Actors Guild. And subsequently to that, after all, many years, I hear that there is no extras guild any longer. It's just Screen Actors Guild because in essence, that's what everyone is there to do, is to act. And it should be respected and not just, extra. And then you get a bump. You get paid more if you're standing here. You get, it was,
Hmm. A
it
lot of
should just
semantic.
be a base pay for an actor,
Hmm.
right? I mean, you had to dress the part, you had to act the part, you had to be whatever the director wanted you to be. That's kind of what I remember about it. And I remember it was always disappointing to be considered an extra. It,
Yeah.
yeah,
It kind of just
just
demeans you
didn't.
as a
Yeah,
person, not just as a performer, but even just as a
exactly.
person. It's like you're extra, you're there.
Yeah, I mean, one one director he would like to joke, okay, prop them up back there,
Like you're not even actual human beings. You're just like literally prop.
right? You just get a dummy back there, and anyway, yeah.
But yeah, as far
So
as like Star Trek goes, we'll come back to that for a second too. There, because you were there for several episodes, essentially in the background doing different tasks. Are there any memories that really kind of like stick out to you of your time performing on that set? And I know again that at that point it was just kind of a job, so maybe things weren't sticking as much. But like, what else is there that you might recall from your time on that set?
well, I recall because being on a set for a day and you only have 2 or 3 scenes, you get to know people around you. So I would talk to the hairdressers or the makeup people, and my mom was a homemaker, right? And so I learned to sew and knit. So I would bring my knitting to set and sit and knit and talk to people. And that's kind of how I used my time offset, right? Even though I was present, I I could do other things. I'm always busy anyway. So to just sit and I couldn't really read that, you know, that wouldn't have worked, though I love reading. I couldn't read on the set, but I could knit
Mm.
or crochet or something. I could create something. I always like to be busy and creating things. So that's what I recall of getting to know the people around me.
Mm.
I talked to Bill Shatner a little bit, this person, that person, and um, just became, well, I was there for 7 episodes, I think. So people were familiar with me and I with them.
Mm.
And so they would say hello and, it was like a bit like a family. I remember hearing conversations about this must have been after a few of the episodes came out and it was on television. And I remember hearing conversations about Mission Impossible
Mm.
and how people were a little concerned with the ratings and maybe we were passing them and maybe we weren't and so there were those things going on behind everything,
Mm.
you know because no one knew how it was going to be received, right?
Yeah. That was a thrilling time in Hollywood, not just for Star Trek, but just in TV in general, because it was such a competitive time of like great shows.
Yes, it
Yeah.
was competitive and there were some great shows going on.
I don't know if you had
I
a
think
TV.
Mission Impossible. I watched Mission Impossible too, and it was a great show.
I don't know if you had like a TV in your apartment at the time or not, but like, did you ever watch the episodes you were in when they first aired?
No, we didn't have a TV.
Have you seen them since then? I should ask. Have you like ever seen?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, I have. I'm kind of bummed that the original isn't. It got put away or stored or something, and it is no more.
well, the Cage
But
you can
yes, I
watch.
saw.
If you talk
Yeah,
about the Cage, that is out there actually. So if you haven't seen it again in a while, it's out there.
it is.
Yeah.
Well, my scene from the cage isn't.
Okay. So that all right. That scene's missing. Okay.
It's not there. Yeah, it's been. I don't know where it is. There's some photos of that scene with Jeff Hunter, but the whole scene isn't there.
Okay.
I think people have been looking for it, but
Yeah, I'm sure it's out there somewhere. It's got to be.
yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that kind of brings us from Star Trek to something we talked about a little bit earlier as well, which was how, around the, I guess the 70s, early 70s, you decided to kind of depart from the Hollywood life and bring your life into a new direction. So you kind of told us a little bit about why, but if you want to go into more detail, please feel free to. But, from there, what did Carey Foster do with herself once she left the glitz and glamour of Hollywood?
Well, it was sort of a gradual thing. I had a baby, right? And so I was still working. In fact, I did a couple of movies. I did Hello Dolly after I had my first child, and I did Finian's Rainbow.
Hmm.
And I started reading about childhood development, and I got very involved. I found Maria Montessori. Oh, I know why too. Is my sister-in-law was decided to become a Montessori teacher, so she went to train in Italy.
Hmm.
And when they came back, they lived with us for a little bit. Her husband, my brother-in-law, and Sue, my sister-in-law. And she started talking about Montessori, and I thought, I need to find out about this. And my child was about 2.5. And so the first thing I did was I found a Montessori school to put her in the valley, and I just liked what I saw. And the more I read, the more I liked.
Hmm.
And then a friend of mine and I were talking, and we were reading about it. And when I do something, I do it all the way. I get very intense. And so I thought it would help me be a better mother, right? It wasn't something that I thought I would end up becoming a
Right.
Montessori teacher, but I thought if I immerse myself in this while my child's young, I'll know more about raising children.
You're just looking
And
for a better
maybe not.
understanding of that, basically.
Right. And so it ended up that this wonderful woman, Francesca Claremont, was an original Montessorian. She knew Dr. Maria Montessori, and had been one of her followers, right?
Hmm.
And she and her husband implemented some of the materials that were created and put in the Montessori classroom. So these were scientists, right? Educational scientists, right? Educators. And she was still alive, and she was running a training course in Santa Monica. So my friend and I went, and basically it was like an audition. We went and talked to her, and I took my baby because I didn't have anyone to take care of her. And Mrs. Claremont was just wonderful with her. And she talked about all of these people. I mean, her life was just filled with Gandhi. And I mean, she was an amazing woman, amazing. And I became starstruck about. And so I decided to take the Montessori training. And it was a year's course. It was in Santa Monica. It was 5 days a week. So at that point, I didn't go to auditions. I wasn't thinking that I wouldn't ever again. I was just thinking, I need to do this. And so that's what I did. And then I kind of fell in love with the idea of being an educator and in this way. And I still am. I still love the classroom. I love seeing children make discoveries because of the environment that you prepare, and you let them find things by inspiring them with interesting stories or things that will make them want to find out more. Um, so I started in the primary class with the 2 to 6 year olds. And then I taught for about 11 years and opened a school in Santa Barbara. And then I wanted to find out about the elementary child because my children were older. And so I went and took the elementary training in Washington, D.C. And so I have both trainings and have been teaching for a long time. Yeah.
Well, the world needs more good teachers, so thank you for all your time in the classroom and for helping educate
Thank
the
you.
future of this country.
Thank you.
But we also
Yeah.
should mention too, that you didn't just leave behind all things, performing, but you also stayed in the dancing world. So what did you do with yourself after, again, talking out your Montessori teacher? What did you do now to keep yourself involved in the dance world?
Well, I I left it for a few years, and then my children, I put them in dance in here in Santa Barbara, and I found a friend who had been a dancer with me at Eugene Loring's, and she had a dance studio and with her husband and they had both been in ABT, American Ballet Theater, and so I enrolled my children there. And as time went on, I would take classes occasionally, and they decided to retire, and they asked me if I wanted to do, and the people who were buying the studio asked me if I wanted to do the children's classes because I have all this experience. And I never quite stopped. I always taught little ones, like 2 to 4 year olds. I would do a music dance class for them at whatever school I was teaching at. And so I started doing that. I started teaching after school. I would drive right to the studio. I would teach 2 or 3 classes. I would teach a jazz class. And then, so it became pretty soon I was swept away with that too. So I would work at school and then I would go right to the dance studio and I would teach 2 or 3 classes of something, ballet, or the little ones. I would teach the little ones creative, ballet classes for the older ones, and jazz. And then about and I was involved with Santa Barbara Festival Ballet for many years. That's what the studio became, and they do the main Nutcracker in Santa Barbara. But a few years ago, my daughter and I separated from them, and we created our own dance studio. So that's what I'm doing now. Is I'm teaching Montessori, and I'm teaching at a dance studio. So
And for folks who might be interested in that dance studio, what's it called? How can they find out more about it?
it's Inspire Dance Santa Barbara, and we teach baby classes all the way to adult. Yeah. And it's mainly ballet that we have, but we do have some tap. Not me. I don't teach tap. Someone else does that.
Well, it's not too late to start taking that class and learning for yourself, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And we have a Spanish teacher too,
Hmm.
teaches Spanish dancing.
I wish I was in the area.
Yeah. No, yes, you would love her, Rosal.
But I think it's
Yeah.
kind of funny.
She was, well, in Santa Barbara, there's a big festival, right? Spanish Days. And that's when all the Spanish dance studios, perform. And so Rosal was the teacher that we have, was people work really hard to become the spirit of Fiesta. And she was spirit of Fiesta, back in the 80s. So she's a good teacher. Yeah.
One of the topics that came up earlier in this conversation was the phrase dance as a language. And I think, especially you as an educator, I mean, these two things must go hand in hand because, from my perspective, it doesn't take a professional dancer to want to learn how to do something physical and more so understand the way that their body moves and works. It's important for performing. It's important for just daily life. So I guess
Yes.
for you, how do you kind of combine these two elements and what does it do for a human being when you do combine the dance with the education and just understanding who a person is?
So in Montessori, there are some exercises that she had in the class for the little ones, which is called walking on the line. And what I realized was, as a dancer, you learn about controlling your body, right? And how to be in your body. And many times children are just like, can be wild. But if you watch a Montessori class, they aren't. And the lessons are so carefully done, like how to push your chair in without making a sound.
I could
Right?
use that lesson.
And but it's for like 2-year-olds, and they're just fascinated with how you do this, and they will really work hard. So they're learning, it's dance, right?
It's
I
the
mean, it's
mastery
how
of
to
your
move
body.
your body and control your body so that you have control of yourself. You gain a confidence about yourself. How do you carry that tray with glass on it and 2 bowls from the shelf to your table? You cannot be out of control with 30 other children in the class. How are you going to do that? So, how do you walk? How do you. And then it's, about being social, how to take care of other people, how to be polite.
Mm.
So it's all of those things that actually are in a dance class. You come in and bow to your teacher, you say please, you say thank you at the end of class. So you're right, it's very connected.
Mm.
How you sit in your chair, how you sit to write. Why is your handwriting sloppy? Let's look at how you're sitting.
Let's not look at my
All
handwriting,
right.
Carey. That's a whole other episode of this podcast.
That's a whole other. So we work a lot on how we move ourselves through space in
Yeah.
the classroom. And we listen to a lot of music and sing songs, and I've actually, until COVID, we were doing a musical every year.
Ah, that must have been
We were
fun.
doing musical theater. Yeah, it was really fun. So we did. We were we would get musicals, like Jungle Book, and and we would they were adapted for children
Mm.
through, I think it's MTI. I'm not sure. Anyway, it's a theater group in New York City. And so we would get the rights to play the music and do the show. And yeah, we had a great time. We've done a lot of theater.
Mm.
So I was in charge of theater. And that's how also, your presence on stage and how you project your voice, and you just become, overall, I think you become a very a more confident person wherever that takes you, you know.
It sounds like that's kind of like the gift that dance gave you, and not just the physical end of it, but for you mentally, it gave you that kind of like confidence and put a certain perspective into how you approach things in the world. And I guess that's also things
It
that you're
did.
imparting on your students.
It did. It did. I think the whole process has kept me young
Mm.
in a way. I'm around children a lot, but I, uh, and I've absorbed so much from them. I learn from them every day. So that keeps me alive, right? It keeps me wanting to keep um, enjoying them and my work. So
Yeah,
my
well,
work has never stopped. Just keeps going. My kids keep saying, "Why don't you just pull back a little bit. But my doctor said, no, just let her keep going.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the aging process, I'll tell you.
Not a fan of it personally, but but
Not there yet. No. No.
just kind of bring things up to a little bit of a close here as we come to the end of this interview here. I do want to ask you just a few other little rapid fire questions, and just kind of thinking about your career performing as a whole. I always like getting this question from folks. What would you say would have been the best day that you ever had on a set, and what would have been the worst day you ever had on a set?
The best day I would say would be the learning process, being would be one of the first days where I was excited and not, and totally involved and right there and excited to be there and, you know, seeing all the people and the work that they were doing. And that would have been that to me was the best. So I had a lot of best days, you could say, because you would go from one show and then to another show and to another show. I think the worst was probably when I was, so if I'm not early for something, I'm late. And was that time when I was late and I got scolded for theater. Yeah,
Okay.
that was for theater. And
Well, that's not too bad though. I've heard much worse stories than that, so that's not bad. Just getting
yeah,
scolded for being
I
late.
didn't like it. But I really enjoyed what I did. And I would put everything into it, just like I still do, with the work I do. So I was pretty happy with my life as a dancer. I really enjoyed time on the set on Finian's, being around Fred Astaire, and that kind of work ethic, you know.
We didn't really even talk about that movie, but I know that was a big movie for its time as well. Finian's
That
Radio.
was huge. That was huge. And Hello Dolly with, Gene Kelly
Yeah.
and Michael Kidd choreographed it, and he had been um, the original Billy the Kid in Eugene Loring's ballet. So that was an experience.
Yeah.
So all in all, I had a lot of good days.
Well, that's good to hear. That's what we want.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you bet.
So, how about this could be either professionally or personally, or maybe a little bit of both. But what was the most valuable piece of advice that someone ever told you that you still think about and still use today?
I would say it was Gene Roddenberry who gave me a reading list of books to read. And one of the authors was Philip Wiley, who had a very unique way of seeing things. And Gene he said simply, you should not believe everything you read. and then he gave me these books to make me think, right? So I still consider that today when I watch things or, that I don't believe everything just because someone says or writes it down doesn't mean it's true. And so having a critical mind. And I find that also as a Montessori teacher, that's part of the Montessori environment is you create an environment where the children critically think about things and question. And I think that's really important, especially in our day.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely want to be able to really think about what's happening around you and just be able to discuss it and understand it and not just take things at face value. So that's an important lesson.
Right.
For you, Carey, looking at your career and your different careers, what do you think that the legacy of Carey Foster is going to be?
Well, it's going to be through my children. And when I say my children, I also mean all the people I've touched. Because I know that I have. Every once in a while, I had a parent the other day say, her child volunteered to, to travel around the world teaching, and she said, and the parent came to me and said something, you might not realize this, but my children are reflecting all of the work that you inspired them to do. And I hadn't thought of that. I didn't realize that my influence was that, but it is. And I did know a little bit because I'm also careful when I talk to children so that I don't influence things beyond what I want to, enlighten them about, and then for them to discover things.
And last thing for today, Carey, what is the best part about being a piece of the Star Trek universe?
Well, being rediscovered. I had no idea that, and seeing the excitement and the love that exists from all of the fans, and to realize that Gene's work is going to last for a long time. He has left a legacy that has touched, speaking of touching people, has touched millions around the world. Even my doctor, unbeknownst to me. So, yeah.
Awesome. And you're part of that legacy, Carey. You are part of that Star Trek universe.
I am, and I'm humbled by it. I really am.
That's it for this week's episode of Trek Untold. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to follow this podcast on social media, go ahead and check us out on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, all at Trek Untold. If you're listening to the audio version of this show, please leave a 5-star rating. Please leave a review if you can, and help us get into those wonderful algorithms that we need to do to grow this podcast. And likewise, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to like the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell to get all notifications for future episodes coming your way. If you're in a position to financially support Trek Untold, please consider doing so by visiting patreon.com/Trek Untold, where you can support the show for whatever amount you'd like, and every little bit helps us continue to go at full warp speed. Don't forget to check out the show notes for any important links to things we talked about in this week's episode, and links to our Amazon storefront where you can buy some Star Trek merchandise of your own that once again helps support this channel. So until next time, I'm Matthew Kaplowitz. This has been Trek Untold, and as always, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars, is powered by the Rageworks Podcast Network and affiliated with Nerd News Today.